Welcome to another Kohima Educational Trust webinar. It's a really exciting one tonight. I'm delighted that we've got Elizabeth with us tonight to talk about the Wasbies. We need to talk more about Wasbies in my view, and her story is amazing. Anyway, I'm going to allow her to talk about that, and in the few moments that we have before we start, I'm just going to welcome everyone as you all load up. I can see people again from around the world. It's really good to see you. Do forgive my formal attire. I've just rushed back from a work meeting and haven't had a chance to change. Yes, we've got people from all around the world again. Lots of our regulars are with us, and that's very exciting. And it's time for me to hand over to Sylvia to introduce the evening.
Thank you, Rob. And you always look very smart, whatever, but thank you for making it back for this Kohima Educational Trust webinar. And as always, it's good to have everybody with us tonight. Hello. There's lots going on here, as ever, but tonight it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for the evening, Elizabeth Lockhart-Mure. One of our trustees mentioned last year to me that it would be great to host a webinar on the Wasbies. And when I mentioned this to Rob, he immediately said, "Oh, you must call Liz Lockhart-Mure." So I did, and very happily she agreed. The Women's Auxiliary Service in Burma, colloquially known as the Wasbies, were a little-known small contingent of women who ran a canteen service for the men of the 14th Army during the Burma Campaign. Liz's aunt was one of them. They were formed in January 1942 to undertake cipher duties for the army in Burma, but upon the fall of Rangoon, they transferred to India, where with the blessing of the army hierarchy, they soon set up a canteen service, which could be found at staging points, airstrips, seaports, and railheads, as well as deep in the remote mountainous jungle and on the hot, dusty plains of Burma. And where the troops went, the Wasbies went too, and were considered to be a huge morale boost to those battle-weary men of General Slim's 14th Army. And tonight I know we'll make them far better known than perhaps they were before we started. Elizabeth is the granddaughter of a pioneer family who emigrated to East Africa after the First World War under the auspices of the Soldier Settlement Scheme. Her grandfather was a tank commander and had been awarded an MC at the Somme. Moving to the UK in the early 80s, Elizabeth set up her own specialist freight forwarding business. So it was only following her retirement that she was encouraged to write this relatively unknown story based entirely on her research following the discovery of a long concealed cache of documents and medals. And as always, and already said, Rob Lyman is here, which we are delighted about. And he's going to put it all into context for us and provide the surrounding historical fact. Please do ask questions if you would like to. As always, the best way for an immediate answer tonight is to do it on Q&A, or we'll be very happy to pick them up later if you prefer to put them on chat. So that is enough from me, as always, and I will now hand over to Rob. Thank you, Rob.
Sylvia, thank you very much indeed, and how nice it is to see everyone in the forum tonight. It's really exciting that you've managed to join us. I've only had to travel a couple of hours from Barrow. You guys are from all around the world. It's very exciting. I came across, I don't know who sent me Elizabeth's book a couple of years ago. It was published in 2018. We're going to plump this at the end. We've got a few copies, I think. Have we got some copies, Sylvia, in the... And we do indeed. That's excellent news. And I absolutely loved it because it's full of some cracking characters. And I think the one thing that stands out for me about the Wasbies, about how big these people are. These women decided to, and you know, they forced themselves onto the army and said, we can do our bit. And goodness gracious me, it transformed the nature of the fighting in the Far East, certainly in 44 and 45. And the story of the reconquest in 45 can't really be understood without the ladies of the Wasbies. And she's an interesting character, isn't she, Liz? Your auntie. And I've always called her Maria, but I think it's pronounced a different way, isn't it? Maria. Maria.
No, Mariah.
Mariah.
In
Okay.
Carey, Mariah.
It was Maria, but I have
Well,
been
all her friends and all the Wasbies called her Maria, but the family calls her Mariah. So
fabulous. Well,
Mariah she is.
that's enough from me. Just to say that I was really excited to read the book. I met Liz last year and I said, okay, what we need to do is get you along to a KT webinar, and you're here. So I'm going to stop talking and invite you to take the chair.
Well, I am here, and a huge big thank you to both of you for inviting me to talk to you this evening about a subject that is very dear to my heart. But firstly, I feel you should know that I am no historian, which was made clear by Sylvia just now. My interest in the Wasbies is purely personal, as I feel passionately these hardworking, brave women should be recognised. Slide 2, you've got an image of Nin Taylor and Mariah. The Women's Auxiliary Services, as Sylvia has said, were affectionately known as the Wasbies, and I'm here to tell you all about them. Mariah was indeed my maternal aunt and my reason for researching the Wasbies and writing her story. Following her death in May 1988, aged only 71, I found her diary, some really scrappy little notes, photograph albums, and her medals, none of which I knew existed. Prior to her death, I did know Ra had left Kenya in 1943 to visit her husband at Officer Training College in Quetta. He was with the KAR, later the 21st East African Division. Ra didn't return to Kenya, and finding herself stranded in India, she decided to join the Wasbies in March 44, and Nin was then their commander. After Ra died, it was a shock to find a record of her time with the Wasbies, during which she was not only mentioned in dispatches, but was also awarded an MBE. And here we have an image of the little diary, which was the beginning of a long journey to write her story. I had asked Ra to tell me about the Wasbies and what she did during the war, but she firmly said it was all in the past and she really, truly did not want to go there. After her death, one of her close friends, who'd also been a Wasbie, asked if I'd found the diary, and when I said yes, she encouraged me to do something with it. I hadn't a clue where to start. The task of writing a book was a daunting exercise, to say the least. I managed to speak to a few Wasbies who were still alive and willing to share their stories, and the 8-year journey to write the book began. None of the women I spoke to thought they'd done anything special. They felt they were just doing their bit like everybody else. But they were keen for me to write Ra's story. I was astonished to find that there was very little recorded about the Wasbies. Of course, there was no internet at the time, so I delved into various military tomes to no avail. One or two mentioned the Wasbies in passing, but they didn't go into any detail about them. Of course, publishing the book and giving my talks has attracted interest, and a lot more anecdotes and information has come to light. We have here a picture of Ra's medal and MID, which I found with her papers, and it was this reason really that I felt I should do something about it. As Sylvia said to me when we first chatted, everybody loves a map. So here you are. Here's a couple of maps indicating the campaign area, India and Burma. I'm sure everybody knows that here, but strangely, a few of the groups I've spoken to hadn't a clue. The Women's Auxiliary Service Burma was formed, as Sylvia has said, on the 16th of January 1942 to undertake cipher duties for the military in Burma. But when war was declared and the Japanese bombers began their attack on Rangoon, the main group of Wasbies were evacuated by sea with their first commandant, a Mrs. C. Dean. The docks were already on fire and Rangoon was being heavily attacked, but upon boarding the ships, most having left their husbands behind, the women immediately set to work, caring for casualties, stowing luggage in the holds, and generally taking over jobs which would normally have been done by stewards. Of the original 350 Wasbies, 65 continued their work with Army HQ, moving north by train, standing room only, with Nin as assuming command. I don't have time to go into detail of their journeys. Suffice to say, they finally made Simla in May, where they disbanded in their original form. Nin Taylor then approached the military hierarchy with the suggestion that the Wasbie be reformed as a canteen service, offering a taste of home to the men. In amongst Ra's papers, I came across a notice issued by Wasbie HQ in India, which was headed, "Join the Wasbies, the 14th Army needs you." The criteria was that recruits were to be physically fit, willing to turn their hand to anything, and have an ability to rough it when necessary. A knowledge of typing, bookkeeping, and an ability to drive would be useful. The women would operate under the umbrella of the British Army. They would be paid, wear uniform, and hold ranks. It was felt if they were caught by the enemy, they would be safer as uniformed personnel. They kept the black chinthy on the scarlet background as their badge, and the first canteen opened in Shillong in September 1942. From their HQ in Shillong, Nin Taylor initiated a major recruiting campaign, attracting women from many differing walks of life. Initially, their number was small, only about 80, 65 of which were the original Burma recruits. In the main, recruits were the wives and daughters of military personnel, missionary and colonial expats from England, Australia, and New Zealand. Their ages ranged from girls in their teens up to middle age. Each team comprised 4 to 6 women, and they would go wherever they were needed, be it in and around Shillong or further afield at Imphal and Kohima, down to Dohazari, Chittagong, and Cox's Bazar near the Arakan region in the south. The Wasbies would operate tea counters from static canteens at staging points, railheads, seaports, airstrips, transit camps, base camps, etc. Mobile canteens would visit men in field areas, parking along roadsides, visiting gun sites, temporary airstrips, medical dressing stations, or casualty clearing stations. They often helped the nurses. At the beginning, the women were very much on probation and were aware they had to make a good impression in order to be accepted. Some of the men felt it was a mistake, and they certainly shouldn't be anywhere near forward areas, but this was soon proved wrong. I rather like this photo, one of many that I rather like, actually. It's a photo taken of Florette Pelly serving from the rear of a mobile canteen. Florette was one of the longest serving Wasbies, one of those evacuated from Rangoon, and her story is at the Imperial War Museum if any of you ever wanted to listen to it. We all know the saying that an army marches on its stomach, and the girls were aware of that. Their supplies came from the amazing army bulk depots who distributed a mind-boggling quantity of supplies over a huge area for many differing nationalities, faiths, and dietary requirements. I think, Rob, you've given stats on this. I don't know whether you've done a talk on it, but yes, it was some undertaking. Everybody involved in catering, including the Wasbies and their cooks, produced some amazing culinary creations, bearing in mind the drawbacks. Kitchen supplies were a problem, often turning mouldy. Cooking fats gave off suspicious odours. There were always shortages to overcome, and things like syrup and jaggery had to be substituted for sugar. Just an example. Fresh food, often difficult to obtain, resulted in serving tinned meats and fish, such as the good old staple bully beef, and as a last resort, revolting soya links, a man-made sausage said to meet all human needs, which everybody loathed and tried to avoid. The girls were very resourceful, and at more permanent bases, they sometimes planted veggies and kept hens to top up their fresh egg supply for their cakes. The women worked alongside the men deep in the humid jungles, high in the forests, in that searing heat on the plains, beside stinking paddy fields, all soaked to the skin in the monsoon, surrounded by mud, and of course, the constant plague of flies and mozzies. They didn't just serve char and wads, tea and a treat. From the vans, they were a corner shop of necessities with stocks of basic medical supplies, toiletries, tinned and dried provisions, essential to men who were away from a base. Here we have a couple of images of Wasby canteens. The Army had fitted out Chevrolet vans with storage shelves inside and serving counters at the rear and or the sides of the vehicles. The vans were usually driven by the girls, sometimes pretty close to the front line. They served all ranks from all nations and were told each day where they would be needed. At the roadside, as you can see, top left, water was heated on just a little primer stove beside the van. In October 1943, an unusual canteen nicknamed the Elephant Arms was set up at Imphal. The girls had fitted out individual bungalows to resemble a gentleman's club, with a big warm fireplace and easy chairs in one, a library and a games room in another, along with a Dobie and a Jersey facility to wash and repair their clothes. Sadly, this didn't last long as it became too dangerous for the girls to remain in the area, so they were moved on to Dimapur and didn't return until July 1944. Canteens operated in tents from vans or in bombed-out houses. At stations, they would meet incoming and outgoing trains, carrying men to and from the battle zones. They worked from 5 in the morning, often well past midnight, and on occasions throughout the entire night, serving hundreds of sandwiches and gallons of tea. Water was boiled in 40-gallon drums and was served from tin baths using jugs. Apparently, one evening they made over 700 gallons of tea, some undertaking. It was exhausting for the women. Their feet swelled. Their injured hands often had to be attended to by the medics as a result of opening so many tins and cutting such huge quantities of bread. They often used up to 200 pounds of flour and 100 pounds of sugar a day to bake their bread, cakes, and of course fudge, which was a favourite with the men. On the road, most of the Wasbies undertook minor repairs themselves, cleaning dust-clogged engines, plugging leaking radiators, fixing punctures, or reattaching an exhaust damaged by the shocking roads. You might notice at the top photograph, often a recruit would insist on taking their pet, and this dog, along with a cat, which I mention later, were accepted and enjoyed by everybody. Again, a distraction and a touch of normality for the men. In addition to running canteens and the shops, the girls were also asked to provide a recreational facility where they accumulated a quantity of books, playing cards, board games, etc. And they pooled their records and always had a gramophone playing in their mess tent. Dances were held twice a week. Occasionally they were treated to an Ensa film or stage show, the most well-known, of course, being the Force's sweetheart, Vera Lynn, who entertained the men in India, and she can be seen on the right. Of course, the girls were always in great demand at the dances, pretty exhausting after a day's work, and they were always glad when the tempo changed from a jive or a jitterbug to a more sedate waltz or palais glide, a 1930s English sequence dance. I'm including this photo of Reverend Philip Tubby Clayton. He was the founder of TOC-H, which I'm sure a lot of you will know about, an international Christian charity set up in Belgium during World War I to offer R&R to soldiers. His niece, Bubbles, Nancy, was a member of Ra's team. Nancy used to write poetry and encouraged the men to do this as well. I do have a few poems and songs written by her and the men, but sadly won't have time to read them today, although a few of them do feature in my book. The photo of Gus, and I don't know who Gus was, and his Besser girls were in Ra's album. TOC-H and Besser, Bengal Entertainment Service Association, worked alongside the Wasbies at most of the camps. Now we come to the 36th Division and going back into Burma. The land of temples. These two images, along with the next one of General Festing, were in Ra's album. They are all cuttings from Picture Post, dated the 17th of March, 1945, and I have those torn out pages. They were taken in Barhay when the Wasbies were there. Towards the end of 1944, and Rob, correct me if I foul up here, Allied troops were in a position of attack rather than defence, and the specially formed 36th Infantry Division commenced their drive from Michenar in the north, moving south towards Mandalay. This is another of my favourite photos, and I just had to include it. The 36th Division comprised 29 and 72 brigades and was under the command of Major General Francis Wogan Festing, affectionately known as Front Line Frankie. He was a character and a legend, a giant of a man, not only in stature, but also in reputation. He was respected and loved by his men, and apparently was greatly feared by the enemy. It was a feather in Nin's cap that he'd made a special request to have 2 Wasby teams attached to his division, one of which was headed up by Ra. They were the first Wasbies to go back to Burma, and they were advised to take the absolute minimum baggage. It was imperative they travel light, as they would be constantly on the move. On the 20th of December 1944, Ra's team, including the cat, were flown into Burma, landing in a US Army Air Force Supply Dakota on a minuscule runway at a place called Indore. The girls were all rather airsick, and having travelled in a DAC, I know what that is. And upon arrival at Indore, they weren't a picture of health. The harassed American who met the plane was expecting food and other urgent supplies, not a bevy of jungle green-clad, somewhat queasy women with a cat. Apparently he remarked, "Gee, what a cargo, women," words to that effect. Anyway, they whizzed off to their first camp, which was in Qatar, and were immediately faced with helping preparation of Christmas dinner for hundreds of men who were about to head for the front, but had been promised a festive meal first. So it was sleeves up and heads down within hours of arrival. Leading up to and including Christmas Day, each unit had been given a day off in an attempt to enjoy the best Christmas dinner possible. Canteen bulk stores had excelled themselves. According to the chief medic's account, pigs, ducks, beer, turkeys, and all other goodies conducive to a first-class bellyache descended like manna from heaven. Even boxes of crackers had been sourced. He also comments, "The saying that pigs can't fly may be correct, but you should see them at the end of parachutes hurtling out of the sky." According to Ra's account, a pig and one of the turkeys had a rough landing, breaking their drop baskets, and the last she saw was the two animals rushing towards the forest, parachutes trailing, with a couple of BORs in hot pursuit. Anyway, they were obviously caught and dealt with because everybody agreed the festivities were an unqualified success. Now the teams were with the fighting division, the girls lived and worked at the main HQ base camp close to the front line. They were within earshot of gunfire. They even felt the pounding of the big guns, at times seeing and hearing the roar of the low-flying American Mitchell bombers as they headed for the battle zones only a couple of miles away. Mobile canteens with a BOR driver and guards travelled many miles each day. Occasionally they would encounter Japanese snipers and they'd have to turn back. Sometimes even their static canteen at the HQ base was put under guard, and at one point the girls were all issued with revolvers, with only a quick bit of target practice to make sure they knew what they were doing. Much fun was made of them by the Americans, who christened them the pistol-packing mamas. Jungle camps. When in the field, camps were usually situated by a river. As we all know, a water source is of prime importance, not only for consumption by humans, but also the animals. It was also, of course, imperative for bathing and laundry facilities. The rivers did, however, have disadvantages, as during the monsoon they would rise at tremendous pace and often supplies had to be moved very quickly. On one occasion, apparently, a bridge was washed away, entailing double handling, with stores having to be ferried across the river on local boats. On another occasion, the water did manage to flood the stores area, turning precious sacks of flour into paste. Sugar and dried ingredients ruined beyond redemption, leaving only sealed and tin goods usable until replacements were forthcoming. Naturally, not immediately. The girls improvised and took all this in their stride. When moving at short notice, sometimes temporary field ovens had to be constructed using empty ammunition cases insulated with mud. Baking tins were fashioned out of the metal linings of cigarette cases, with kitchen utensils often just quickly whittled from scraps of wood. The women lived alongside the men, either in bashas, bombed out houses, or under canvas. They had little privacy. There were certainly no mod cons. They were not treated any differently to the men, and nor did they expect to be. They did discover at one point, though, when using parachute tents, that when lit from the inside, they were quite well silhouetted. And this caused a little consternation, bearing in mind they were surrounded by men. Washing facilities comprised a camp shower or a tin bath, if they were lucky enough to have a sufficient water supply. Otherwise, they just resorted to the use of camp buckets and basins, as you can see on the left. The women were responsible for all their own kit, including tents, camp beds, bedding, and mozinets, which they assembled and packed up themselves at each location. They did most of their own laundry, mended their own clothing, and were often asked to assist the men with their mending too. They continued to maintain a recreational facility with a little book collection, as can be seen on the right. They also kept the gramophone, ensuring a restful musical atmosphere for anybody who dropped by. They ran poetry, photographic and story competitions, in addition to the dances and films. Logistics, not always easy, as I know you've probably heard, and I actually saw Mike Tickner give a fascinating talk on this. But most of these photos are from Ra's album and from the Royal Gloucester's Museum, who were very helpful when I was researching the Wasbies. At main bases, supplies were usually delivered by road or by rail, but in the field, logistics were always difficult. Roads were often non-existent, deep in the forests or high up the hills. They were either bumped to smithereens or feet deep in mud during the monsoon. So alternatives were utilised, as shown here. Locomotives and rolling stock had invariably been destroyed by the enemy. The engineers had devised a method of swapping vehicle road wheels for flanged rail wheels, and they would fix any available rail track using jeeps to haul 2 or 3 little wagon loads of goods from A to B. Local riverboats and rafts were used to cross the rivers and go up and down the rivers. Then there were airdrops. In the case of the 36th Division, I believe they relied entirely on airdrops for all their requirements. This, I believe, mainly undertaken by the US Army 10th Air Force. I think that's right, is it, Rob?
It's absolutely right, from Michenar down to Mandalay.
Yeah, thank you. The girls were often invited to the officers' mess to attend drinks parties, and I was surprised to see how formal it was, even when they were in jungle camps in the middle of nowhere. I mean, somebody must have lugged around a typewriter and its accoutrements, required to prepare and print orders of the day, notices, and these invitations. One simply doesn't stop to think about what must have gone on behind the scenes. Another talk, another time. I don't know. Maybe you've done this, Rob. I've missed it if you have. The Battle of Maitzen, one of the fiercest yet in Burma, according to Ra's diary. It was here that Supremo, Lord Louis, and General Sultan flew into Barhay to meet up with General Festing at the height of the battle. Lord Louis arrived on his special Dakota nicknamed Sister Anne, after a QA nurse, Gertrude Ann Ramsden, who had been a member of Lord Louis' staff. General Sultan arrived on his C-47, which was known as the Magic Carpet. And here we have a picture of the two planes. Sister Anne looks a bit scraggy, but that's another story. Immediately after the fall of Maitzen, Lady Louis visited Barhay for a couple of days in an attempt to raise morale. During that time, she made a short trip back up to Cathar to visit a medical unit and a malaria hospital, where the Wasbies spruced themselves up and served her afternoon tea in their mess. So it was all very exciting for them. At this point, I feel I should ask you to bear in mind that these women were untrained, quite young, and inexperienced in any form of combat. Most came from protected backgrounds and had never been exposed to the aftermath of an actual battle zone. They were to experience this at Maitzen. Although Maria glosses over it, she mentions that it did affect the mood of the girls, who were quite shaken. The division then continued southeast in early March, reaching Mongmit, where the ruler of the province, the Sorbwa, his rank equivalent to that of an Indian Maharaja, lived with his English wife Mabel, a great friend of canteen number 12, Gay Tucker. The Sorbwa, his family and entourage had fled into the hills when the Japanese invaded, and upon his return, he and his family were welcomed back with much ceremony in which the division was involved. They then continued on south to Magok, Namsor, Mamio, and Kumi, or Kume, reaching Mandalay and Mektilla at the end of April 1945. At Mektilla, the two Wasby teams found it really distressing when setting up camp, as the area contained evidence of heavy fighting and unburied enemy remains. The monsoon had started and continually uncovered shallow graves. Amongst other things, the water supply was contaminated and it affected the health of the whole camp. But again, they just got on with it. In spite of life being pretty grim at times, there were lighter moments, and one of which she writes about was their stop in Mogok, the main ruby region of Burma. Here the girls and the men bartered excitedly, using some of their limited food and cigarette rations in exchange for jade, rubies, spinels, and other precious stones. Of course, a number were probably fake, but a pretty memento nevertheless. And everybody was happy, even if it wasn't a get-rich-quick scenario. After Mandalay and Mektilla, they flew south, sad to be leaving their division. They arrived in Rangoon just before the victory parade on the 15th of June. The Wasbies had been invited to take part in the march past, so the newly invited girls were quickly subjected to a bit of training after being kitted out with new uniforms, and were soon ready to march alongside the rest of the armed forces. Lord Louis presided, together with the commanders of the Allied armies, Navy and Air Force. It poured with rain. The dye from their new berries ran, streaking their faces bright green. Their soaked uniforms clung rather embarrassingly to their bodies, much to the entertainment of the men. Although Rangoon had been recaptured, fighting wasn't over. There were still men battling in paddy fields and forests to the north of the capital, and the Wasbies used to make up little parcels of cigarettes, sweets, and other bits and bobs, and together with a cheery note. These were dropped by the RAF pilots along with other supplies to the stranded men, a touch so appreciated by those who received them, as can be seen by the letter on the right. In Rangoon, a number of teams, including Maria and Gaze, opened a large static canteen at Mengladon Airfield, where they established a permanent facility which remained in operation long after hostilities ended. following the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the surrender of Japan on the 15th of August 1945, some of the Wasbies remained in Rangoon. They assisted with the meeting and repatriation of POWs, men and women, who had survived the dreadful atrocities of the prison and internment camps. They helped with the provision of clothing, food, and most importantly, gave them news of the outside world. This included the men who'd been on the death railway. The girls had been warned of the expected appearance of the survivors and been told how they should conduct themselves. Those Wasbies who didn't remain in Rangoon travelled further afield to the Dutch East Indies, Japan, and the Andaman Islands to assist with the influx of women and children from the internment camp in those countries. And just to button up my talk, with a few little interesting bits and pieces which I found in Mariah's stash of papers and in her album, one of which is this. She managed to obtain a flight to Dum Dum, Calcutta, to attend the funeral of a close colleague who'd sadly died as a result of an accident 2 days before VJ Day. This rather tatty but interesting note was in Ra's album. It had been handed out on her flight back to Rangoon. The RAF Museum provided me with a logbook and a photograph of Flight Lieutenant Wolfe, whose name was on the message. He was the pilot on 12th Army Commander General Stopford's personal Dakota, on which Ra had hitched her lift back. The museum had no idea about the in-flight note, so I gave them a copy and they were very thrilled, and it's now in their archives. Final order of the day and discharge certificate, just to finalise things. The Wasbies were finally disbanded on the 30th of May 1946, 9 months after VJ Day. 2 Wasbies were killed in transport accidents and 1 seriously injured in a plane crash. On the whole, they were jolly lucky. It was the highlight of a weary soldier's day to discover there was a Wasbie canteen in the vicinity, and the beastliness of their existence could be forgotten for a brief moment. The girls would often come across little notes pinned to trees, reading, "Wasbies, please call," or "Wasbies are welcome." Throughout the Burma Campaign, the Wasbies had provided a valuable morale boost all along the route from base camps to forward fighting zones, and all the men had a deep affection for these women. Their efforts were appreciated by all the men, from the highest to the lowest ranks. They received a number of official and personal letters of appreciation and thanks, and I have many. Shown here are letters from General Sir William Slim and Lieutenant General Sir Montague Stopford, also a personal one written to Ra from Major General Mansur. Sadly, I don't have time to read them, but they all express gratitude and admiration of the Wasbies' efforts. At the time, this booklet was the only official record of the Wasbie operation, and it contains a glowing foreword from Lord Louis, in which he says, "I'm glad to take this opportunity of expressing my admiration for the splendid work done by the Women's Auxiliary Service Burma since its formation in 1942. The Wasbies have the distinction of being the only women's service in Burma, and they played a very important part in the campaign." Each of the Wasbies was given a copy of this as they were discharged. Yeah, here I have a tablecloth onto which Marat stitched the badges of all the units in the campaign. It was presented to Nin on their disbandment and was subsequently used at reunions. It was returned to Ra after Nin died in 1942, but sadly, when packing up her house, it got misplaced and I lost it, together with her uniform and all her Wasby paraphernalia. It, of course, has never been seen again. I was very touched by this little letter, which I received from a veteran who bought a copy of Ra's story. He was one of the few men that I was able to speak to who'd actually been with the women, and he spoke so highly of them, and I just love how he said they were all Dame Veras to the men. Lavender McLachlan, née Todd. She and her sister Pamela were both Wasbies. Their father worked with Burma Oil in Rangoon, and she had so many anecdotes. She was the last Wasby I was able to speak to. She was just amazing. Another photo in Ra's album, which Melissa said you hadn't seen. Her first posting was to run canteens for the men involved in the Arakan, and it obviously meant something to her, and it's also got the 36th Division symbol on it. Anyway, I now close with the Burma Star Memorial in the National Arboretum in Staffordshire, where I'm told there is a tree planted in the memory of the Women's Auxiliary Service Burma. One day I'll get up there and I'll see it. Annual Burma reunions, to which the Wasbies were invited, continued to be held at the Royal Albert Hall until 1995. I sincerely hope that I've been able to portray the bravery and the fortitude of these fine ladies, as I strongly feel they should not become the forgotten women of the forgotten army. They may have only played a very small part in this long, complex campaign, but it jolly well was an important part. And I'm proud that Mariah was one of these amazing women, and it's my ambition to ensure that they become recognised. Mariah's first marriage ended during the campaign. Her second marriage was to a POW. He'd been on the railway in a number of those awful camps and died as a result soon after they were married. I have all his papers and some of his letters. No wonder she didn't want to talk to me about it. Thank you.
That was incredibly fantastic. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's very, very moving. And I can attest to the power of the story. Everyone listening tonight needs to go and buy Front Line and Fortitude. But just as an interesting aside, people need to realize that throughout the campaign in 1945, the 36th Division, there were two British divisions fighting in Burma. 36, interestingly, it was originally labeled the 36th Indian Division in order to confuse the Japanese, fought all the way from north to south, from Michenar down to Rangoon. And the Wasbies were involved in the fighting all the way from Michenar. It's not easily recognised in many of the books about the campaign that the Wasbies accompanied the 36th Division all the way from Michenar down to Mandalay and then thereafter down to Rangoon. Well, that was fantastic. There's some very, very interesting comments in the chat. Lots of people suggesting that, Elizabeth, you need to do a few more presentations to the We Have Ways team. I'll speak to James Holland about that, and that'll give you a new audience. That's very exciting as well. And some interesting comments from people. My friend Nick Metcalf, who went round Assam with me last year. Nick's gone and put a link into all the awards given to the Wasbies, honours and awards during the war. So if people have got access to that, and Mal's gone and put up the link to the TOC H history as well. It's very, very
good. That's great.
Very
Thank you.
Well. I'm going to hand back to Sylvia. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and we'll start the wrap up.
Well, Liz, I can only thank you again, like Rob, and I think like all of our viewers tonight. I mean, you said at the beginning you weren't a historian, but boy, you brought such a personal and meaningful touch to a lot of our viewers, and certainly to us, you know, whose fathers and grandfathers actually knew a Wasbie and had been helped and had been affected by their help. And the details that you brought to it too about the food, I thought was marvellous, really, really good. And thank you very much indeed. Really, it will be, I'll let you have all the chat, and obviously the webinar will be up on the KET website. We've already plugged your book, I'll do it again. Front Line and Fortitude. A lot of people watching tonight have already read it, but some of you haven't. And happily, we have copies for sale in the KET shop, which Liz has kindly offered as any sale will be donated. The money's earned will donate to KET. I do want to give a KET plug tonight. Liz, I'm sorry you're running the slides, but I'm going to just jump in with this. Since our last webinar, of course, the tragedies that have happened in Burma, the earthquake and the thousands of people that have died, I felt we should just mention it. So many places have been mentioned tonight, also on Richard's webinar in January, and many of the places our fathers and grandfathers were there, Mike Tiller and Mandalay and all of these places. If any of you should feel that you would like to donate something, I know it's been hard personally looking at the newspaper ads. You think, well, where is the money going? But please, Mel will put up a link. Sampan Travel, who we know and trust, their chairman has offered a link, and we can put it perhaps up on our website so that you know a place to go. But obviously our thoughts are with all our friends in Burma. But on to the regular KET plug, which you all know and love. And those of you who are familiar with our website will know that we have a wide selection of books available, which now include 2 new additions. I mentioned last time the book researched and written by Hazel Mindham, entitled The 2nd Battalion, the Royal Norfolk Regiment at Kohima 44, which Hazel has produced for the Royal Norfolk's Regiment Association, sorry, with all the proceeds going to the Royal Norfolk Regiment United Charities. And they have kindly allowed KET a small discount. So we have purchased some from them, and they are therefore selling on our website with proceeds going to KET. And we've also now got copies of Richard Duckett's SOE in Burma, following his brilliant presentation last January. It features a wealth of photographs and accompanying material never before published, including direct testimonies from veterans. And of course, we also have most of Rob's books for sale, and I'm sure that many of you already have your libraries well stocked with his books. But to those of you who perhaps are joining us for the first time, you may wish to read more about the overall campaign. And you will also on our website find lesser known titles listed, including our own Road to Kohima, which tells the story of Naga veterans in their own words. Our events in York are now just 2 months away. Thank you to everyone who has booked already, and we are looking forward to seeing you there. The service is on Thursday, the 26th of June at York Minster, presided over by the Dean, and the Chaplain General will be giving this year's address. On Wednesday, the 25th, the evening prior to the service, we are holding an evening of remembrance, which has been inspired by your wonderful contributions to our forthcoming Book of Remembrance. The evening will be compared by Richard Duckett, who will guide us through the campaign and introduce the speakers along the way, who will be revealing personal stories as told to them by their fathers and grandfathers who were there, rather like the story we've heard tonight. And just to say thank you to everybody who has shared their wonderful family stories. We can't add any more now, but we are working hard to have it all available for the last week of June. Our next webinar is on Thursday, the 15th of May, when I hope you can join us to hear David and Emily Lutkin talk about their father's account of jungle warfare in World War II Burma. In the meantime, thank you all so much for joining us. It's always fun to have you and all your chat, which all gets passed on, and we look forward very much to seeing you next time. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.